Hi, in this video I'd like to talk about flex remoting, specifically how flex remoting resolves URLs in client-server communication. One of the most common questions we receive in our discussion forums is specifically for the send failed error, and I thought we'd put together a video that describes how flex remoting resolves those URLs so you can avoid those nasty send failed errors. To begin with, let's review how flex connects to the web server to do remote method invocations. So first of all, if you are using AMF, you have to have a remoting gateway, and here we're going to be using WebWarp in this example, which could be WebWarp for Java, .NET, or PHP. And any remoting gateway is going to have endpoint URI, which is a URL that this particular remoting gateway would be listening for the incoming AMF requests. A Flex client sends a remoting request to a destination, which internally is resolved to an endpoint URI of the remoting gateway. Once the request is received, the remoting gateway processes the invocation and then delivers the response back to the client. To understand where those URLs come from, we need to consider and review how Flex creates those Flex applications. So to begin with, there are three main components. First, you have your Flex project, which is a combination of MXML and ActionScript code. There is Flex compiler, and there is a collection of configuration files typically located in the webinf/flex folder. The files in the webinf/flex folder must be referenced in the additional compiler properties for the Flex compiler. Specifically, it is the -services followed by a path to services-config.xml file. When the application is compiled, the Flex project is fed into the Flex compiler, and the compiler also loads the configuration files from the path specified right here. And in the result, you're going to get your SWF, which is a compiled Flex application. It is very important to remember that the compiler embeds all the information about channels, endpoints, and destinations into that SWF. So that information, by default, is not dynamic. It is statically embedded in the compiled application. In terms of the actual configuration files, in the most trivial scenario, you're going to have your services-config, which is a collection of the channels, and every channel is going to have its own endpoint URI. You will also have a collection of remoting destinations, which are referenced in remoting-config.xml. Both files are present in the web-inf/flex folder, and services-config is the one that is referenced by the compiler. Services-config also imports remoting-config, therefore there is no reason to import both files for the compilation. Let's review one of the channel definitions. Specifically, it is the basic AMF channel definition, which you will find, in this case, in WebWarp for .NET. Now notice that the actual endpoint URI is a relative URL. In this case, it is just webwarp.aspx. As a result, when the application is compiled, the URI for WebWarp, which will be embedded in the SWF, is going to be just webwarp.aspx. And let's review how that URL is going to be resolved. So the browser makes a request to the web server to load some Flex application. The Flex application is loaded, and you can see that this was the path that it was loaded from. So the Flex app is loaded from this URL. The endpoint inside of the Flex application is a relative URL. It is just webwarp.aspx. As a result, any remoting request sent by this Flex application will be sent to this particular URL, which is the URL where it was loaded from, and webwarp.aspx concatenated together. So in the end, when the request is sent, it's going to reach WebWarp server. However, there are some scenarios when things could go wrong. For instance, in case of a browser or AIR application, if it loads the same Flex application from the file system. So Flex application is loaded, and you can see that the path that it was loaded from is just file : and then followed by some path. It is not an HTTP URL. As a result, since the URL embedded in the Flex application is relative, then remoting requests are going to be sent to http://webwarp.aspx. And since it is an invalid URL, you are going to get the send failed error, as you can see right here. So the question is, what can you do to tweak the config files to make it possible to load the application either from the file system in a browser or load it as an AIR application? One of the things that you can do is in services-config in the channel definitions is to specify absolute URLs. In this case, when the application is loaded into the browser, there is no question how to resolve the URI because it is going to be absolute and the requests will be sent directly to that particular URL. It is very important to rebuild your Flex or AIR application after you make any kind of configuration changes. One of the reasons to do that is the Flex Builder caches your configuration files, so you might need to do project clean from the main menu to make sure that the application is rebuilt with all the latest changes. Alternatively, one of the things that we recommend is to create a mini framework that would allow you to load, let's say, an XML file with all the remoting URLs in the runtime, and then let the Flex or AIR application determine the actual URIs from that dynamically loaded configuration file. If you go with that approach, it would be important to reconstruct the entire chain of the Flex remoting core classes, including remote object, channels, channel sets, and so on, using the APIs. But this way you will have the ultimate control over the actual URL where the requests are being sent to. That's all we have for today. Thank you.